You're okay.
Do you want to
Hi, everyone. We have people still logging in, so we'll give them just a few minutes to get connected and then we'll get underway. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Link Center today for the shared learning group focused on supporting someone through with trauma. I want to go over a few housekeeping items while we get started. We do have live captioning and ASL interpreters present today. The session will be recorded, and the recording and the transcripts will be shared with all attendees. The PowerPoint and documents that we review today will be shared with everyone via email. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues. Attendees cannot see the names of other attendees, and all attendees are muted. Please use the chat function throughout the webinar to communicate with other attendees and with the hosts during the webinar. You can use the chat by clicking on chat at the bottom of your screen. Please be aware that your name will appear in the chat if you make a comment, and you can change your display name if you want to by clicking the three little dots next to your name and selecting rename. We will have representatives from the Link Center watching the chat and responding throughout the session today. If you'd like to submit a question or a comment privately to the host and panelists, you can do that by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and submitting your comment anonymously. Following the webinar, you will receive an email with the material we reviewed today, the recording and the transcript, along with an evaluation that we ask you to please complete in response to today's shared learning group. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Stacy Nonamaker, who is going to start today's presentation. Stacy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're so grateful that you found the time. We will be talking about the Link Center, a grant funded by the Administration for Community Living. And just by way of an introduction, I'm Stacy Nonamaker, as Stephanie mentioned, and I am with the National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services, NASDS. And I am a middle-aged white woman wearing glasses. I have brown, straight, shoulder-length hair. I'm wearing a gray sweater with a pink shirt underneath, and I'm in front of a white Zoom background. So today we're going to be talking about supports for trauma. And while we won't have enough time in our hour and a half to do a deep dive into the topic, we do have enough time to start the conversation about how to get you all some tools and information and resources related to trauma. Now, we know that the conversation today, the content may be triggering for some. So please, please take care of yourself. And please let us know in the chat if there's anything we can do to change the words we use as we're meeting today. You know, we even know that the word trigger may be triggering for some. So please give us your thoughts and your reactions. And we invite you to share and do that in the chat. And really, truly, we welcome all sorts of participation today. So we know that some of you may be here to actively engage, and some of you may desire to just listen and witness, and that is okay. We welcome all of that in this community. So a little bit about shared learning groups, this is the second quarterly meeting of shared learning groups that we're holding. We did a series of shared learning groups in October, and we focus on crisis services. This series of meetings that we said focuses on supports for trauma. This is the fourth meeting that we're holding. We held a meeting yesterday with direct support professionals. We held one yesterday with clinical professionals. We held one just a little bit ago for families of people with lived experience. And now we have this shared learning group with you all. The information and the content in all four of the presentations, this PowerPoint, is the same. We did tailor it just a little bit, change the discussion questions to make everything relevant for each of the groups. Sorry. So this presentation and the content and everything we're showing you is a collaboration and work done by the Link Center partners. And that includes people with lived experience, that includes researchers, and also people who work on policy issues. As Stephanie said, we are recording today. We will transcribe the meeting as well. Transcribing means that writing down all the words that people say in the meeting. So we'll have the recording, we'll have the transcription, and any materials we show you today that will all be emailed to you after the meeting. We do encourage you to share all of this information, the recording, the transcription, and all of these resources with other people in your life. So now I get to turn the mic over to Perry Spencer, a mentally ill autistic self-advocate, AAC user, and a member of the Link Center Steering Committee. They are a graduate of Tabor College Project Search, a program focused on teaching employment skills to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and other disabilities. Perry worked as a direct support professional, and they are currently searching for a new work opportunity that would even further enhance their skill set and allow them to grow as an advocate. So I'm turning it over to you, Perry. Thanks so much for being here.
I'm a white person with short light brown hair. I am wearing a grayish-green coat. My pronouns are he, him. We are going to talk about trauma. Trauma is when bad things happen to us or we see bad things happening to someone else. We may feel scared, hurt, or upset when bad things happen to us. This is okay. We may also feel scared, hurt, or upset when we are reminded of bad things happening. This is also okay. Discussions of trauma are difficult, and it is okay if you need to take a break. I want to talk about the inherent trauma that can come from having an intellectual or developmental disability, or IDD and for short, and mental illness. Existing as someone with an IDD and mental illness comes with trauma that is not often talked about. Some people don't know that these experiences are traumatic. Ahead, there will be talk of unmet needs and discrimination towards people with IDD and mental illness. Be gentle with yourself. The first thing that is traumatic is not being able to say what you want or need. This happens most to people who are non-speaking, but can affect everyone with IDD and mental illness. It is very difficult and leads to not getting your needs met, frustration, and meltdowns. Another thing that is traumatic is a lack of choices and autonomy, which is the freedom to make choices about your own life. It is very scary to not have control over basic things like what you want to eat for dinner and major things like where you want to live. It makes a person feel very out of control and scared. Everyone should be able to make decisions about their life, including people with IDD and mental illness. Something else that is traumatic is not getting your support needs met. For example, Jackson lives on his own and needs help to use the stove, but his support worker only comes some days. He may want to use the stove on days where his worker isn't there. but can't do that safely because his need to have help while using the stove is not being met at all times. Having unmet support needs limits the choices of people with IDD and mental illness. Jackson may not have the choice of whether to cook dinner using the stove or the microwave when his worker is not present. It is also traumatic when people assume you are incapable or cannot do things without talking to you, especially when it is people who are supposed to be supporting you. People may think that you can't do anything for yourself, or because you can't use speech, you can't understand or say anything. This is not true, and it is not okay for people to think that. People should ask what you need help with instead of thinking you can't do certain things. The last traumatic thing is ableism. Ableism is when someone discriminates against you or treats you unfairly because you are disabled. There are little ways people will treat you unfairly. For example, someone may talk to your worker instead of you when you go out. Even though it isn't okay, some people may not know unless you tell them. There are also things that even non-disabled people know are not okay. Like a boss not giving someone a job because they are disabled. Ableism is found in all parts of life because the people who make laws have bad feelings about disabled people. Next, I want to talk about abuse and keeping people safe from abuse. It is a scary thing to think about, and it's okay if you need to step out, especially if you are an abuse survivor. However, it is important that we talk about abuse and how to keep people with IDD and mental illness safe. If we don't talk about it, we can't change it. It is important to know that people with IDD and mental illness are at a much higher risk of abuse than people without IDD. There are a few reasons why I think that is. Firstly, people with IDD and mental illness may not know what abuse looks like. For example, someone may not know that someone taking their money or controlling their money without giving them choices of how to spend it is abuse. It is important to teach people with IDD and mental illness about what abuse can look like so they know when abuse is happening and how to report it. Another problem is that even if a person with IDD and mental illness does know that they are being abused, they might not have the tools to report abuse. This is especially true for people who are not speaking. Communication devices with symbols do not have the correct names for genitals. This may not seem like a big deal, but it means that someone who uses a device can't report sexual abuse. A person with IDD and mental illness also may not know who to report the abuse to, or how to say what happened in a way others will understand. People with IDD and mental illness are often denied sex education. This makes reporting abuse more difficult. Someone might not even know that sexual abuse is happening without information about sex that the person can understand. People with IDD and mental illness need and deserve correct information about abuse and help from supporters to stay safe. Some people with IDD and mental illness may have a hard time staying safe even with correct information and support because of their disability. Supporters should be looking out for changes in a person that may be signs that abuse has occurred. However, it is not a replacement for teaching people about abuse and how to report it. It is important to remember that abuse is never the victim's fault. It doesn't matter what they did or didn't do. Believe people when they tell you about abuse. That is most important. The difference between crisis and trauma. When a tree stands against the storm, it's during the storm, the resistance to the storm, that the tree is in crisis. After the storm, bent and soaked in rain, branches snapped and completely torn away. Now the tree knows trauma. I compare myself to the tree. I know my strength is in my roots. Monica Wayford, survivor. This meeting, we will be talking about trauma. And strategies people use to address trauma. Take care of yourself and allow silence to be a safe space. Feel empowered to do what's necessary for your comfort and care. We celebrate our individuality, our diverse culture, and our singularity while we celebrate the discoveries realized in our collective humanity. We know that we are each unique with our own experiences in the world. We celebrate our we emphasize with experienced traumas that hinder our resilience. Some people have experienced trauma that makes it hard to recover and move forward. We listen with open minds and compassion, without judgment or blame.
Thanks so much, Perry. Thanks for really setting the stage on our topic for today, supports for trauma. And thank you for your incredibly powerful words. If people feel comfortable and are willing to introduce themselves, please type in the chat your name or any group, association, or membership you may be a part of that you want to share as well. We would love to see who's joining us today. So by way of an agenda, I am going to take a few minutes and talk about the Link Center. Some of you may have heard about the Link Center before. I'll just talk a little bit about it, and then we'll really get into the topic today, supports for trauma. And we'll talk about why we're talking about trauma. We'll share some resources that we have found that are out there that we want to share with you all. We acknowledge that there are many resources out there related to trauma-informed care, trauma-informed approaches, mostly in the mental health field, some in the intellectual developmental disability field, some in the brain injury field. But what we have really been finding is what is out there is really not specific to a diagnosis, that there's really practices or strategies or supports that are good for everybody. And so we're going to share some things from that perspective today, from really that lens today. So although the Link Center is really tasked at bridging systems, bringing systems together to support people who have co-occurring conditions like intellectual developmental disabilities, brain injuries, other communication differences, and mental health conditions, we know that there's not a lot of out there in terms of resources specific to those folks and trauma. But as part of the Link Center, we're going to be working towards that and building some resources and materials, and we'll share one today with you as well as some other things, again, that we've been finding and think will be useful to you all. We'll end today asking you to engage with us, participate, share with us in reaction and response to a challenge that we're going to pose to you all about someone who has experienced trauma. So we'll be ending our time together doing that group exercise. So we're going to say this now, and we'll say it again later, and encourage you, invite you all to use the chat. If you think of a resource, or if you think of any piece of information that you've come across that has been helpful to understanding trauma generally, maybe even understanding your own trauma, please share that in the chat. These are called shared learning groups, and I want to point out the shared part of that title. We're really looking for an opportunity to share what we're doing at the Link Center, but then have you all share with us what you've been thinking, what you have been tapping into, or things that you have been finding that have been helpful that we could be thinking about through our work at the Link Center. So what is the Link Center? Again, I mentioned before that the Link Center is a grant, and it's funded through the Administration for Community Living. It's a 5-year grant. We're about 1.5 years into that grant, and it's really looking to bridge systems, pull systems together to better support people with co-occurring conditions. And luckily, we're doing this work with a lot of partners. The main partners are NASDs, that's who I am associated with, NAD, the National Association for Dual Diagnosis, and NASHVID, the National Association for State Mental Health Program Directors. You'll meet some of our partners and colleagues from NASHVID today, as well as meeting some of our other partners that really help us keep an eye on diversity, equity, inclusion. So you'll meet Max from Green Mountain Self Advocates. Another partner is the Autistic Self Advocacy Network, who was instrumental in helping us ensure that all of our materials are plain language for these meetings. We also partner with the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators and Communication First. Part of what we do at the Link Center is we want to be sure that we are really giving people what they need and doing it in a way that accounts for quality. And we have some partners who help us do that. We have the National Center for START Services. We have the Sonoran Center of Excellence, as well as the Ohio State University Nysanger Center. So we're very lucky that there's a lot of really wonderful partners who have experience and expertise, and also thinking about how can we better support people with co-occurring conditions. So there's 3 goals for the Link Center. The first one is system change. And what we mean by that is that oftentimes people who have co-occurring conditions or more than one condition require or need services and supports from lots of different systems, whether it's the developmental disability system, the mental health system, the medical system. And in my experience, oftentimes people getting those services and supports from multiple systems can be tricky or difficult. And so part of the work of the Link Center is really looking at how can we improve that. And that's looking at policies, that's looking at service design and how systems are designed and how we can better coordinate those services. A second goal is looking at building capacity. That means making sure that there are skilled people out there who can support people with co-occurring conditions. And so to that end, we're going to put work into getting information, to getting resources to direct support professionals and to clinical professionals as well, so that we have more people who are able to support individuals who have more than one condition. And then finally, we're hoping that if we make some system change, if we have a diverse or skilled workforce to support people who have co-occurring conditions, that people will be able to access services that they need. So we're looking to get people the services that they need through building capacity, through system change efforts, and get people person-centered, culturally and linguistically appropriate services that they need. So how are we going to do that? Well, there's quite a few activities that we're doing through the grant. Again, on the left side of your screen, you're going to see, I'm repeating it, but we're putting an eye on diversity, equity, and inclusion in everything that we do. And also continuously ongoing looking at, are we doing what we wanted to do, what we set out to do, and are we meeting the needs of people with co-occurring conditions, supporters of people with co-occurring conditions, and others. And we do that through, it says here, project management and evaluation. Stephanie mentioned that at the end of today's time together, we're going to offer a survey to you all so you can tell us about your experience with these meetings. We're going to use those types of feedback in everything that we do so that we get the information that can inform and guide what we do next time. And speaking of guiding the work of the Link Center, we are very, very fortunate to have a steering committee made solely of people with lived experience. And not only do they contribute to all of these activities, you met Perry. Perry's one of our steering committee members, and they contributed to all of this content today. So publicly, thank you, Perry, for doing that. It's been a wonderful learning experience for me, and I think we put together some really great content for you all. But generally, the steering committee is guiding the work ongoing that we do with the Link Center. Another activity is every quarter, we're committing to holding shared learning groups like this one, so that, again, we can share what we're doing as the Link Center and things that we're finding. And for you all who are out there day in and day out, as supporters, as people with lived experience, so that you can share with us, what do you all need? What is out there? What can we elevate? What is not out there that we can think about taking action, creating? We're also tapping into and engaging, meeting with other people who are thinking about how can we better support individuals with co-occurring conditions, and we call them our expert contributors. And then finally, we're really looking for resources, trainings, information that's out there that's specific to how do we support somebody with co-occurring conditions, acknowledging that when I say that, that's a wide spectrum of people, right? When I say brain injury, when I say intellectual developmental disabilities, when I say communication differences, there's a spectrum of people within just those groups that I mentioned, right? So we're really looking out there to see what information is out there. What can we take and put on a website? It's coming soon website. It's not up yet, but we will have a Link Center website. And we're hoping that that website will be a national repository or a place for us to put all of this resource and information for people to be able to access. And you'll also see today that we're identifying what's not out there and creating materials and resources, and that will be up on the website as well. Before I turn it over, I'm just going to take the opportunity or the time to post a poll. Really, we're interested as we do develop those resources and materials and share information. We're curious how you like to get your information. So just take a second. Let us know what you're thinking. If you choose other, that's okay. If you could just let us know in the chat what you mean, that would also be great. This is wonderful. Great response. This is super helpful to us, very informative to us in terms of letting us understand how we should be putting information out, which is a big part of our work at the Link Center. So hopefully now you have a little bit of background on the Link Center if you didn't before. And I get to just talk a little bit more about the shared learning groups before I turn it over. I've said this before, going to repeat it, but really what we're hoping that you get out of today is that you understand in terms of supports for trauma, some of the things that we have to offer you by resources and information and training. And then we also want your input. So again, if there's any resources or information that you go to when you think about supports for trauma, please put that in the chat. We're collecting that. And then during the group exercise, we're going to ask you to help us identify potential solution to a challenge that we're going to present. And that really helps us understand your experience in relation to supports for trauma and really the direction we need to be going as the Link Center. So now I get to turn it over to Dr. Brian Sims, who's a partner of ours through the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. Dr. Sims, thanks so much.
And thank you, Stacy. And again, thank you to the Link Center, and a special thanks out to the steering committee, just a phenomenal group of individuals to work with that makes it so easy for us to be able to have these kinds of conversations. So I'm Dr. Brian Sims. I am a senior medical advisor with the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm an older Black man with glasses, gray-black hair. I have a gray sweater shirt on, and my background is white. I wanted to just take a pause a moment because who we're talking to today, I really don't need to even go into the title here of why we're talking about supports for trauma, because each and every person I'm speaking with knows trauma, has histories that are involved in it. So what we want to talk more about is how we can be of help to you. And I'll just give a brief overview of some of the elements involved and some of the data that's in there with trauma. But I want to start off in a different note this time around. I want to give you guys a resource to work with. I'm part of what we call a crisis jam that works with 988 and so forth. And I was on it today, and there was a document that was created through the Bazelon Center. And the title of it is When There's a Crisis, Call a Peer. And I'm going to put that in the chat box a little later, and I welcome you at some point in time to read it over, because it's extremely supportive of the work that you do, but also with the acknowledgement that trauma is a back and forth issue. It is not only something that you are trying to help others to navigate through, but you yourself are attempting to navigate through it as well. So thank you again for all that you do. Now let's go ahead and move to the first slide, if you will, please. What we're going to do is just kind of talk in general about trauma. And the best way to approach it is to go back to that core definition of trauma, what people have understood for a long time to be the definition. And this definition that we've embraced actually came from the efforts of SAMHSA, which is Substance Abuse Mental Hygiene Services Administration, to come up with a definition based on a diverse group of individuals who they gathered together. And one of the definitions that came out of this starts off with the word individual. So what we do know about trauma is that trauma is not about groups. It's about our individual experiences. So it's individual trauma that results from an event or a series of events, because what we do know is that for some, one element of trauma is sufficient to traumatize, and one experience of trauma can really traumatize an individual, or for others, it may be several. And then for even others, there may not be anything at all that they experienced during that time, which makes the definition much more clear, because what it says is that a set of circumstances that are experienced by the individual as traumatic. And that's what we want to take a look at, because you can have two people that have exactly the same situation occur. One may be traumatized while the other is not. And that is just how trauma permeates our entire system. And what it ends up doing is leaving long-lasting effects on our functioning, as far as mental functioning, physical functioning, social functioning, emotional functioning, and spiritual well-being. We want to make sure that that piece is embraced, as well as an understanding and a healthy respect for trauma and its permeations, and the respect for people's spirituality in that. So in this portion, we'll talk about the general population per se, because what we do understand is its pervasiveness crosses all spectrums, all ages, genders, races, ethnicities, sexual orientation. We know that trauma is everywhere. Let's go to the next slide, please. What we also know is that women in general are 2 times more likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder than men. When we also look at the women, and they report higher rates of sexual assault, higher rates of child sexual abuse. We know that men are more likely to experience accidents, physical assaults, combat, disasters, or be a witness to death or injury. These elements are known across spectrum. We see this in all different walks of life. Next slide, please. When we take a look at teasing our population to specific populations, in particular, looking at the BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, people of color, you start to see that lifetime prevalence of PTSD has been shown to be highest among Black populations. And what we also know is that if you look into the minority groups that are represented in our general population, you see that they're more likely to experience trauma, including historical trauma. And that's something that we'll drill down just a little bit more on and need to keep in our focus. They experience immigration stressors, natural and man-made disasters, discrimination and violence. And minority youth are less likely to access medical and mental health care. So you've got all of this together to really not really help people to address the types of trauma that they are experiencing. Next slide, please. If we keep it within the Black and Latino groupings, what we see is that they tend to experience more violence, more poverty, incarceration, lack of access to care, as we pointed out before, marginalization, and low social status, much more than other groups. And then we go back to the historical and, in this case, intergenerational trauma, which is trauma passed down from older people to younger people. We look at our indigenous groupings, our tribal nations, the American Indians, Alaskan Natives, their experience and puts them at increased risk on a day-to-day basis for trauma. And then we take a look at the LGBTQI+ individuals. They're nearly 4 times more likely to experience violent assaults than their cisgender or heterosexual counterparts. So what we're looking at is that all in all, trauma is tremendously pervasive to all groups and in all groups. So let's move to the next slide. So if that is true and it's in all groups, it's no surprise that it is involved heavily in the trauma issue with regards to those with disabilities. It's no surprise to anyone that it would be there, because what we do know and a lot of people may not know is that persons with disabilities are 3 to 4 times more likely than people without disabilities to experience adverse effects, things such as abuse, neglect, or even medical trauma. The other piece is that something we've seen in the general realm with trauma also holds true within the disabled population, and that is that if you consider an adult who approaches for mental health support as having a history of trauma, you're going to be right 85 to 90% of the time. So what it does is it keeps our lens open for the fact that those whom we serve, we automatically can assume that trauma exists somewhere within their history. So it's important for us to keep our focus on what kinds of methodology, supports, treatments that we can give. And from our specific roles, there are many different things that we can do to really cover this in a greater measure. Let's go to the next slide. SAMHSA, approximately 10 years ago, convened a group of individuals to try to determine how best to approach some of the troubling issues that were going on at the time. Back in that time, many people who were hospitalized were placed in seclusion and were restrained. And it was a horrible issue because no one saw any therapeutic benefit in that. So the implementation of trauma-informed care was originally designed to try to reduce or eliminate the need for seclusion or restraint. That then grew from trying to eliminate it to using trauma-informed techniques to reduce the likelihood of seclusion and restraints. What we see now is that trauma-informed populations and encourage individuals to really look at this as a part of how we operate. How do we communicate with one another? And this is critical. So with this, they came up with what are called 6 principles of a trauma-informed approach. And I want you to see this from the dual lens here. I want you to see it from things that you may have experienced, that you are trying to pass on to another individual because you already have experience with it, but you also look at how the other person may be receiving that information. Is it something that we are thinking enough about so that we can get that connection and establish that trust that is so essential? So as we look at these 6 principles, and these can be easily found in public domain, or when you look through SAMHSA at the guides for trauma-informed approach. It's a huge manual that includes these 6 principles. So if we go with the first principle, next slide, please. It's all about safety. And many of us can attest that if you don't feel safe, it's hard to trust. If you don't feel safe, it's hard to find healing. If you don't feel safe, it's difficult to connect. So we make safety as a primary measure because people need to feel physically and emotionally safe if they're going to make those steps necessary to start to move them towards healing, move them towards improving, move them towards self-regulation. So how can you let others know about things that make you feel most unsafe? When you look at what has happened with you, how did you communicate that? So are you able to share with someone else? Share with them those things that make you feel uncomfortable. We've seen in many settings when we go across the country and otherwise and look at systems in operation that quite often many don't feel safe in their systems. It may be because of pictures on the wall. It may be because of conditions that they are experiencing, but it doesn't get better unless that dialogue begins about what is safe. And it's a back and forth dialogue. You know this already, that when you communicate with people and they trust you, they'll share with you those things that make them feel uncomfortable. I would also, when you have an opportunity, ask you to link to these lived experience videos that are on each of these slides. These are persons with lived experience who are giving their take on how important it is for each of these 6 principles to be in play and how they have made a change and how that person has begun to address their specific trauma. Let's go to the next slide, please. The second of the 6 principles involves trustworthiness and transparency. Wow. Being open and honest with whomever we are talking with. It's one of those things that kind of has a little common sense reversal to it, doesn't it? Because if we look at ourselves and we are in front of someone that we are hoping is going to give us the best treatment that they possibly could, we hope that they're going to be honest with us. We hope that they're going to be open with us, because that's the only thing that's going to make us feel like we can put our trust in there. So how can you be sure that others who want to support or help you are helping by creating a mutual trusting relationship? So it gives the example of you share your story, and again, as much as you want to, because again, when we are doing trauma-informed perspectives, it's not about getting people to tell their story. It's about having people feel comfortable enough to, at their level, be able to communicate whatever it is that they are comfortable sharing with you, in order to get them to understand what happened and how to move to next stages, how to be helped. Next slide, please. We go with peer support, and this is a really important element because it really defines some of the wonderful work that is being done all over the country. And some of the things that persons with lived experience, peer support has been huge, because what you're doing is building mutual healing relationships with those that can identify with what you have been through. And as you discuss that, and I have to share with you that I spent a number of years working with a wonderful team of the national, it used to be called the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. And Dr. Joan Galise was our project manager, and we would travel all over the country. And on our team was always a person who went over the overview for trauma. There was a person, such as myself, that would overview the neurobiological aspects of trauma, but we never went anywhere without taking a person with lived experience, because they brought validation to everything that we were talking about. And they also brought that mutuality that really helped people to put their trust and be able to get involved more deeply with how they were going to start their healing process. So you have someone you can call when you need to talk to about how you're feeling at the moment. And then they give you guidance and support since they've already been there. So that's really what you do. You really help people by connecting. It's kind of almost like a veteran's perspective, where if you notice in treatment of veterans, veterans like to talk to other veterans. And you find that that trusting relationship gets fastly established because they feel that that person can understand some of the things that they may have experienced. Let's go to the next slide, please. We move now to collaboration and mutuality, the actual sharing of power and decision-making. And sharing is such a huge thing when we are talking about principles of trauma-informed involvement, because what you're doing is you're actually empowering that individual to be part of a team, be a partner in their treatment. So you ask the question, do you have others in your life who do listen to you, who are judgment-free, who respect you and don't try to control you? Another way to look at it is there someone in your life, or are you yourself displaying empathy towards those that you serve? Or do you get empathy from those who speak with you? So when you're talking, tell them what's important so that you can find better ways to help support yourself and to help support others. This is critical, folks, because in this mutual agreement, you are gaining a voice, and you're gaining that kind of voice that has tremendous power, not only to provide for those that you're serving, but to also bolster and build yourself. And next slide, please. The next one is empowerment, voice and choice. And in this, you're recognizing people's strengths, recognizing their experiences, supporting self-advocacy, choice, and self-empowerment. This goes the same length that we talked about in the principles that we're talking about empowering people. Each of you has a voice, and that voice should be heard. And that voice should be allowed the opportunity to do that connection that can be life-saving sometimes to other individuals who are seeking answers. And sometimes the providers themselves have never traveled the road of the people that they're serving. So it's wonderful to have available those with experience that can then share, because that helps the person not only to be validated, but to feel as though they have a choice, to feel as though they have some power. And the third piece with this is to make sure that you are helping them by giving them tools, because you can't go home with them. You can't go through what they're going to go through when they are away from you. So it's all about helping to bolster and build what they can do for themselves, okay? The example given is interesting. You choose to stay at your apartment alone and not go to your family home for the holidays, and yet the support staff understands the decision and then ask you what you need or what you want to do in order to celebrate. And you look at that piece, and it's sometimes hard because we have the drive to try to get people to get out and do what we consider to be the normal things, or the things that we think that person will most benefit from. But it's important to note that empowerment is built on allowing that individual at least to verbalize what it is they are seeking, how it is they'd like to move. Maybe they're not ready to move that day, but they are willing to talk to you about what it would take to move to the next step. Very important. And last slide, please, involves one that takes quite a bit of explanation, and we don't have time to really drill down here, but a healthy respect for cultural humility, looking at historical issues and gender issues, because these are trauma-informed principles that need to be embedded in every interaction we have. Have a healthy respect for the culture of the individual that you're speaking with. Have a healthy respect for all of those things that are involved often in historical trauma and gender identity, so that you can avoid cultural stereotypes. Get around those things that color our perspectives on historical trauma, that tend to bias gender issues and otherwise. So access and keep in your wheelhouse, as they would say, the cultural humility, because that goes a long way for people to be more receptive of what it is you have to say to them. So I thank you all for the time that you've given me. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Max Barrow from Green Mountain Self-Advocates, who's a partner in with the Link Center. Thank you all.
Thank you for that introduction. And yes, as noted, I am Max Barrows and I work for Green Mountain Self-Advocates. I am a person on the autism spectrum, and I also am a Black man in their late 30s. I am wearing a kind of very light blue dress collared shirt with blue stripes that are a little darker, very thin stripes. And I have on a black, I mean, not a black, a dark blue tie with red and white diagonal stripes that are very thin. And I have short black hair. And so just to put that out there for anybody who may be blind or have difficulty seeing. All righty, so next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk about like a new tool for managing triggers. Next slide. So here is a new tool for managing triggers. When we use the word triggers, we mean things that make you remember something bad that happened to you. The tool is written in plain language, so it is easy for most people to use. So you may be wondering, what is this tool? It is a 2-page handout. It helps people to make a plan for what to do and say if they get upset when they remember something bad from the past. Triggers can be people, places, smells, sounds, tastes, or things. For example, if someone who hurt you smelled like smoke or perfume, those smells might make you remember what happened. Triggers can make you feel really scared or anxious. Our minds and bodies might explode with feelings. When you remember bad things, you might feel sad, mad, or scared for a while. One purpose of this tool is for a person to try to figure out what triggers them. When possible, a person can try to stay away from those things, but for sure, you may not be able to avoid all your triggers. And we have found that knowing your triggers can help you understand why you got upset. How do you use this tool? The tool begins by asking a person to identify their triggers. The question is, what are my triggers? This can be updated as a person gets better at figuring out what reminds them of bad things from the past. Next, a person can make a list of what they can do to be okay when they get upset. These are strategies to use to feel better. For example, take a long walk, sit alone in a quiet space, listen to music, and, talk to yourself. I talk to myself. For me, it can be calming to do an energy release, which is what I call it. And I'll explain it just briefly. An energy release for me is when, I have an overwhelming day. A lot of things have come to mind. And so I kind of let my body like respond to the what's on my mind. And it's a way for me to feel my body, and then all that energy that builds up in my body from those thoughts, I let it out. And it can be seen just from somebody else's point of view as, sometimes they hand flapping, the body rocking, the jumping, however it, comes out of me physically. And I'm only speaking for myself when I say this. Um, Moving on, helpful support. This includes what others can do to help me be okay. For example, for me, I want people to help me stay calm by being calm themselves. Also for me, please do not ask me a lot of questions. And it helps to tell me I am safe. Not helpful support. In other words, what do others do that is not helpful? For example, please do not try to stop me from talking about the past. Do not ignore or judge my feelings. For me, I do not want someone to talk in a loud, demanding voice. Who should support me? Make a list of the people you want to support you when you are upset. It can be anyone. I personally want someone that I trust. Who should not support me? Who do I not want to support me when I am upset? For me, people who do not understand me. When do you use this tool? Go over the completed tool on a regular basis. Support us to practice what we can do to be okay when we get upset, especially if there are new people in your life. Triggers can come up at any time, so have this tool handy whenever it is needed. If it helps, consider posting it in your room or someplace where you can find it easily. How do you share it with others? For me, I would share it with the people I spend time with. It is important to let the people you trust know what they can do to be supportive. I personally would want it to be a part of my person-centered plan. A copy of this can be kept in the home or in your pocket or on your cell phone. Next, I want to get into what is known as checking in. Finally, I'm going to talk about checking in with our supporters. When it comes to checking in, it is not a time to give me lots of instructions or to school me in what you think I should do. It is a time for listening. Here are some neutral questions to ask me to keep the conversation going. How did that make you feel? What do you think? What's important to you? Do you need more information? What have you tried that works for you? And what do you do that makes you feel okay? The goal is to create a welcoming space so we can say what is on our minds. Now, sometimes a person is seeking out your opinions. They want you to tell them what to do. It can be easy to tell us what to do, but it does not help us. You need to help us figure out what we think and what we want to by asking questions or giving us information in a neutral way. For example, if someone wants ideas about calming down, you could say, well, you need to focus on what works for you. But some people try walking, some people try music, and some people try deep breathing. The goal is to stay neutral and keep your opinions to yourself. Checking in is helpful for the person and their supporters. We get others to listen to us. We get emotional support. Our supporters get information on how we are feeling. We tell our supporters what they can do and say to support us. Over time, we build trust. And on that note, thank you for listening to me. And now I will turn it over to Wendy to co-lead us through a group exercise.
Great. Thank you so much, Max. That's such a helpful tool. So hopefully you all can hear me. My name is Wendy Morris, and I am a senior behavioral health advisor at NASHBID, the National Association for State Mental Health Program Directors. So I work with Dr. Brian Sims at NASHBID, but I also work closely with everyone at the Link Center. Such a great project, and we are so glad you're here today. So we do have a group exercise planned. Max is going to read just a short case study, and it'll have a question at the end for the group. No right or wrong answers. We're just looking to get your reaction, to hear ideas that you might have, maybe share what's worked with you or what you've seen work with some of your peers or people in your life. And we would invite you to engage in whatever way and level that you're comfortable. So you can use the Zoom function to raise your hand, and we will take you off mute so you can talk. You can do that with your camera on. You can do that with your camera off. We love to see your faces and hear your voices. We know that's not comfortable for everyone. And you can also use the chat. So if you want to type the chat, your questions or your comments, that would also be great. So we have about 20 minutes for this group exercise, and there are about probably 35 maybe folks participating. So it's a small group, which is fine, but just really want to encourage you all to participate. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Max to read our case example.
All righty. Rich has an intellectual and developmental disability. He has anxiety and had a very hard time in school. He did not have many friends and people would call him names. When Rich graduated, he had a friend who would come to his apartment, eat his food, take his money, use his phone, sleep on his couch without asking, and sometimes hit Rich when he was drinking. The friend ended up in jail for selling drugs. Rich does not like to leave his apartment or see other people. He does not trust anyone. Rich knows he needs a job and that he could lose his apartment if he doesn't get one. What should Rich do? And please open it up. Please say what is on your mind to this question in the chat. But also, if you would like to, if comfortable, unmute yourself. We can call you. If you want to show your face on camera, feel free, but you do not have to if you're not comfortable. Regardless of what, however you want to share your thoughts or answer the question, feel free to do so. And I am eager to learn from all of you. Go ahead, Alice Goltz.
Okay, I'd say one, he should go for it. He should try to get into crisis, to talk to somebody to help him through the process as he needs help, and he needs a job to stay in his apartment. And I'd also think that maybe he can get like a job coach to help him get to the job, help him get the supports to stay on the job.
Those are great ideas, Alice. Yeah, job supports, reaching out for crisis services when he needs those. So finding different places in the community that can help him. Did you have other thoughts, Alice, or?
No, I can't think of right on the top of my head.
No, well, thank you for those ones that you contributed. That's great. I also see in the chat from Jason, it says, are there any remote jobs that Rich could do while he's getting remote
Oh, yeah.
counseling? So
Oh, yeah,
another
that's a
good
good
point.
idea.
So many things right now that we can do virtually.
I see another one in chat from Alyssa Bolt. It says, first thing I'd want to know, how has Rich paid for his apartment up to this point? Getting on SSI might be his best option depending on whether he is able to work.
Yeah, so maybe getting somebody that is able to help him talk about some of those different benefits that he might qualify for, what he could tap into. Great idea.
Idea.
I had another one in chat, and it's from Megan Shin. And it says, my initial question prior to a reaction is whether or not Rich has any supports, friends or family members, or even supports from when he was in school, like their school counselor that they are familiar with, having worked with them in the past.
Yeah, that's a great idea, right? To first find out what supports he has and tap into those. And for the sake of conversation, what if he didn't have those supports? Do you all have ideas on what might be ways to build natural supports or to seek out those types of assistance?
And again, I love hearing from all of you. So in chat, but also feel free, if comfortable, to raise your hand. Okay, go ahead. Oh, wait a minute. I think somebody had, okay, go ahead, Mike Baumberger.
Hi, thank you. I don't have enough background. The individual, I'm assuming, is already receiving paid supports. My question is, Max, you asked for my personal experience. What is?
I asked just for, just a thought on this.
Well, my thought is, as a needy person, I'm doing best to understand what my own resources are without being a tax on others. And I've had quite a number of people living in this building through the past 2 decades that have been taken advantage of. And as a consumer myself, I will go to uproariously ridiculous ends to satisfy, to beg approval from paid supports, and that's very bad. So at this point, Max, I'm very old, and I have income, and I have debility income. The family is there, I guess, but I'm feeling sorry about myself, and I also have a strong presence in Quaker meeting, and I feel a burden sometimes, and that's just going to waste my time. So for Rich, someone developmental debility, the co-occurring acquired condition is anxiety and ennui on a day like this. So I'm doing my best. So thank you for doing this, Max. So wait, how do I? Oh,
You're
sorry.
welcome.
Thank you for sharing, Mike. I see another one in the chat from Alyssa. It says, to get these supports, getting him a case manager sounds essential. They can connect him to other services. Of course, if he's this isolated, knowing how to get one of those could be a serious challenge. Often people in circumstances like this end up in the mental health or even legal system because they don't know where to go for help. So yeah, that can be a problem. And I know some folks have mentioned supports, and that's very important. Peer supports is certainly another place if they're it sounded like Mike maybe has some peers that are close by. We don't know for sure if Rich does or not, but getting connected with peer support in addition to case managers and employment support, some of the other things that have been mentioned could be important. Anybody have thoughts or comments on peer support? I know that was one of the 6 principles that Dr. Sims talked about. Excuse me. And again, we know this can be a very difficult conversation to talk about trauma. So we certainly want to acknowledge that for some people, this conversation might be difficult.
I got this from Jason Harris, and I mean, if you can find support groups in person or online.
Yes, great.
Alyssa Bolt says in the chat, if he really doesn't trust anyone, someone's got to show him how to relearn the ability to trust. Not trusting anyone is an awful place to be in, and you can't stay there forever. And then Don Hill said, certified peer support specialists are people with lived experience who can provide a vast array of resources and support.
Such great comments. And I like the one about learning to trust. And I wonder, Max, if part of, another way somebody could maybe use or modify the tool you introduced would be to learn about trauma, but also learn about what does it look like if somebody's exploiting me, and when do I need to, set some boundaries with people, and how do I do that? Because that's a skill, right? You have to trust yourself to be able to set boundaries with people and recognize when people are taking advantage of you. And that can help trust other people.
Right.
And thank you, Dawn, for giving a definition of peer support. Super important that we all understand the terms we're using. I can be guilty of sometimes throwing those around, forgetting that not everybody, it's not common language for everybody, for sure.
Anybody else? All right, I think I got something else.
Mhm.
All right, so Mike Bomberg in the chat said, being unable to trust people may be leading others to consider me to be untrustworthy. Bonds, I don't think I'll ever get it.
It can be a difficult thing, Mike, I think, for a lot of us, for sure, to figure that out. Personal boundaries, yeah. And that's something you can work with a mental health provider or maybe a peer support with, is kind of exploring what are your personal boundaries. When do you feel like you've been pushed too far? It's like trauma, right? Something that I might experience is trauma, another person like Max might be perfectly comfortable with. And it's the same thing with boundaries. Some of us need a lot of personal space. We don't like it when people come very close to us. Other people just want to hug everybody, right? So it can be difficult when you like a lot of personal space and you have people who want to kind of invade that and hug, and it's hard to learn to say, I'm not comfortable with you touching me, but I'm enjoying talking to you, right? That would be an example of a boundary.
COVID was fun. He
Yeah.
yeah, that was. Anybody else? Feel free to share in chat or put yourself or unmute yourself and share aloud.
And we still have about 10 more minutes that we can use for this time. So again, we have a small group. So, and we know everybody doesn't want to talk, but we would love to take a few more comments or chats. I wonder if there's any of the other, go ahead.
Alice Goltz had her hand up.
Oh, okay, great. She might have put it back down.
It was up
There
and then
she
it
is.
went back down. Now it's up again. Go ahead, Alice.
I think somebody needs to unmute her.
I can't do that.
I wanted to ask you about the triggers. Can you send me that slide? Because I think that will be really helpful for me.
Yes, I believe, Stacy, the slides are going to go out to all participants. Is that correct?
Correct. The slides and the trigger tool, Alice, will come out to you in an email along with the recording of today and a transcript.
Oh, thank you so much.
Of course.
And at the very end, not to steal any of Dr. Pinel's thunder, but at the very end, she's going to share an email with you so that if you have additional questions about the tool, the slides, or what we talked about today, you can send an email.
Okay, thank you.
You're so welcome.
Can you talk about me? Okay.
Yep. So Mike said that can be helpful. Great. So we're glad to know that some folks are going to find that tool, the tool useful. I really love the tool, Max, that you developed, and I wonder if there's others in our audience that think that might be something that they could use, or maybe you have a friend who you think could benefit from using that, one of your peers that maybe leans on you.
Yeah. I just want to say from earlier, Mike, thanks for sharing your very personal story. I would say that, take a chance and try to let other people listen to what you have to say, and, give others, at your Quaker meeting that you just mentioned, a chance to get to know you better. And I know it's scary and you might think, they're, they might reject you, but just as you are the kind of guy that listens to other people. And so just think about giving other people a chance. You might be surprised. They might want to help you.
That's such a good point, Max. We have another chat from Jess. Jess says, I am 21 and in college, away from my family and sisters. For me, peer support can be very difficult to find. My sisters are my only peer support because they understand as well. I'm the only one of the three of us learning about these things through my schooling. I feel like it's opening a new world for me and my sisters. Thank you. So that's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that, Jess. And we hope that the Link Center is going to continue to be able to bring information that's useful to you and your family and other folks who are joining us today. And then I think we have one more from Karen. It says, thank you, Mike, for bringing up your Quaker meeting. Faith communities can be a good place to connect with someone who is open to listening. Yes, and
Yeah.
there are all kinds of faith communities. So that's a terrific resource as well.
I got one from Alyssa Bolt, excuse me. with discussing triggers, it's important to understand that cyberbullies really like to make fun of the whole concept of triggers. So talking about triggers openly can set someone up for very nasty encounters online, but there's more. Social media culture says both, quote, your triggers are not anyone else's responsibility to accommodate, and end quote, if you set off someone else's triggers, it is your responsibility, which can both be true. And then Mike Bomberg said, I want everyone to have access to themselves in my presence so that communications are authenticated from understood and understandable responsibilities. Sure, when friends allow themselves to simply be.
Mhm. And I also wanted to respond to Alyssa real quickly, her comments about triggers, because that's true. On social media, you can definitely get a lot of conflicting advice, as it were, or comments. So always have to be careful about what you share about yourself and your life on social media and what you take to heart from social media. People can be cruel, and social media is an easy place for people to be really unkind and mean to
Right.
one another. So I think, and Max, maybe you can chime in too. I think when you talk about triggers and things that are difficult for you, you really need to talk to a trusted person, somebody that is not anonymous on social media, but a person that you have some history sharing things with, that you know can help you.
Mhm.
So we still have a couple minutes.
Anybody else want to respond? In chat, go ahead, Alice.
I think it just takes a minute for, there
Yes,
she is.
your turn.
Somebody sent me on Instagram. They sent me something about with children, and they were dead Palestinian children. So
Ooh.
I wrote them a letter and talking to them, writing how I felt about it. And he said he didn't say he was sorry. He said, well, everybody else is seeing them. And I said about, because I wrote him a letter about the 3 Palestinian students that it paralyzed, that it was traumatizing to me. And he was like, well, I shouldn't be paralyzed about it. So I sort of like distanced myself with the person.
That's a
Yes.
really good example, Alice, of setting
Yeah.
some personal boundaries, right?
Yes.
So
Right.
Like there was
saying no.
like
Yeah.
my friends, he came up here and we saw Mrs. Doubtfire, and I was talking about, because the father's talking about how sad he'd be without his child, and I'm a parent with a disability that the state had took away my child, and he said, well, they took your child away because you're Sheikhs. So I told him to go home.
Well, good,
So we
good. I'm glad
need
you were, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
we need to be more firm, but some people with disabilities find it really hard. Like I've been an advocate for myself and my friends, and I'm also an advocate for the state to help parents with disabilities and to also help other people with homelessness and people with disabilities.
Thank you so much for sharing, Alice. And again, great examples of setting some personal boundaries. So I think our time for this part is up, but thank you so much for all the great dialogue. I can see some more comments are coming in. We will capture those. We don't have any more time left to talk about them,
I
but
could read it real quick. Unless, all
I
right,
think we need to go to Deb, but
sorry.
I'll leave that to you.
All it says is social media meme culture makes it hard to talk about trauma in any situation. when you are frequently bombarded with the message, stop using your trauma as an excuse for bad behavior, which is so trendy in reality for everyone. Person uses trauma as an excuse for abusing other people. There's 100 more who are responding to their trauma by withdrawing from other people because they don't want anyone to get hurt. But some people think if you even say the words, I have trauma, you are going to say, so I can't be held accountable. Thank you for sharing that, Alyssa Bolt. And I'll turn it over to Deb for closing remarks.
Well, thank you. What a great discussion. I love these case discussions and I love hearing everybody's input. Just to say a little bit about myself, as I said, I'm Deb Peinels. I'm a clinical advisor to the NASD's Link Center, to the Link Center. And I also work for NASHPD as a senior medical and forensic advisor. I am a short white woman with short dark hair and wearing glasses and a beaded necklace and a black sweater today. So I want to just talk a little bit again and just remind you to put in the chat anything that you want about your go-to resources for trainings, websites, or other information that supports you related to trauma or things that you think might be helpful. That would be very helpful to us. So please list anything in the chat that you feel would be helpful in terms of your go-to resources to support you for trauma. Also, just a reminder, the website is coming soon, but until the website is available, you can reach us by email at the Link Center at nasds.org. The Link Center is one word, at nasdds.org. And again, just huge thank you for participating in this shared learning group. Really important to get your input. We can't do anything without your wisdom and experience. We've already now completed our last of the trauma series from today. We had done this with direct service professionals, clinicians, families, and now you all on trauma. But we have more shared learning groups ahead. For example, on April 23rd, please mark your calendars. And April 24th, we have a shared learning group on supporting someone through a transition. The one for individuals will be on April 24th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. And then in August, we have another shared learning group that's going to be on the theme of supporting the whole person. They will be taking place across August 20th and August 21st. The one for individuals will be on August 21st from 3 to 4:30 p.m. So please, please, please mark your calendar and plan on joining. This last slide is, well, not last slide, but this slide is a list of resources that are going to be available to you. This is some of the resources that informed our conversation today. I want to just give a hearty thanks to Perry Spencer from the Link Center Steering Committee. Did an awesome job explaining what trauma means and how to think about it. And Max Barrows from Green Mountain Self Advocates, of course, thank you, big thank you for helping as well and putting yourself forward. And also want to give a big shout out to all of the partners at the Link Center for contributing to the preparation of and content for this meeting. We couldn't do it without our wonderful partners. Okay, so here is your chance to give more feedback. Please use this QR code or the link that's in the chat to provide responses to our survey that will tell us how you thought this went. And your feedback is incredibly important to help us improve our future sessions. So hold your phone up to the QR code and press the link that pops up, or use the chat link to give us your feedback. The survey won't take that long, but it will be really, really helpful as we plan these future events. And again, just a big thank you to everyone for participating.